Are you a real estate professional navigating the bustling landscape of New York City, or simply someone fascinated by its ever-evolving skyline? Either way, you're in the right place. Welcome to another episode of the Big Apple's Core, where we break down the complex world of corporate and commercial real estate. Join us as we explore the latest trends, challenges, designs, and opportunities that are shaping New York City. Today's episode is brought to you by CoreNet NYC's learning sponsor, the Rockefeller Group. Rockefeller Group, a love for people, a love for the city.
Welcome to another episode of the Big Apple's Core podcast. Each month, we try to bring you into the world of New York real estate, what's happening now and what's happening next. Today, we're going to focus on the next. I'll be your host, Nathan Streeter, architect and director of LSM Architects in New York. In April, CoreNet hosted what has become an annual pitch competition for green ideas and technology impacting the real estate market. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Colin Cavote, CEO of BIOME, and Gabe Peschiera, CEO of NUMA. Guys, welcome. You both gave winning presentations at the Green Sparks pitch competition in April. We're now recording this in May, for those who might not know what time it is and listening to this later. But today, we're not going to give an exact recap of that pitch, but I would like for you to give us just a taste. Gab, in 1 minute or less, give me a pitch for NUMA and why individually addressable HVAC solutions are so revolutionary.
First of all, thanks for having me. Second of all, to answer your question, I think it's pretty intuitive for people once we tell them that they get to control their own air. So for over 100 years, we've conditioned spaces by sending cooling air everywhere. And, you don't really know how it works. You try to compromise on a thermostat temperature with your coworkers and you never agree, right? So the only way to really make people comfortable in an office is by providing individualized air. And the beauty of that is you actually save energy by providing that cooling directly to people. So it's essentially kind of like in an airplane. The vent's over your desk, and you control it from your phone. So you control the amount of air and the direction of air from the vent. That's
fantastic. All right, Colin, Gab laid it down, and clearly he has all the solutions.
Yeah.
So where does BIOME come into the picture?
Well, you've probably seen plants around your office, and it seems like plants would be good for the planet, but the supply chain for plants is actually pretty toxic and polluted. So they start in a foreign country, usually in South America. They're flown on air-conditioned planes onto the States and then driven around in air-conditioned trucks. So it's a really dirty supply chain. And then 60% of indoor plants die in the first year. So best case scenario, you have a third party that you're paying substantially for to do the service. But where BIOME comes in is we've developed automated systems that care for plants automatically. So think turnkey living walls and automated planters that you just plug in and connect to Wi-Fi. And with our latest IP, they actually harvest moisture from the air to refill their own water tanks, so you never have to water them. And so we're really looking at a future of autonomy for the natural world inside the built environment.
That's fantastic. And actually really complementary to each other as we're looking at the microclimate within buildings. But taking like a 100-year look, just like a step back, I'm struck that architecture in the past century has kind of gone from these big megacities and shelters, thinking the geodesic city or Habitat 1968. Yet now, with this technology and these revolutions, we're coming closer and closer, like you said, to the individually responsible and individually addressable climate. So I wonder if we could just take a minute and talk more about how we're bringing, or both how these technologies bring that to the individual, rather than us trying to control the entire climate.
So, I mean, when you think about 100 years and you think about what's changed, as someone who works in HVAC, the first thing you think of is the fact that we used to build super talls without HVAC, right? I mean, we would build, we would have radiators, right? That was around back then. But we didn't have this concept of cooling and ventilating. And we had operable windows. Operable windows are being re-explored now for natural ventilation, but it's really challenging to do that in cities. I think people were talking before about their pollen allergies, and they really struggle this time of year in the spring. But it's not just pollen, it's also NOx and SOx, right? The things that are emitted, the contaminants that are emitted by cars and trucks and industrial processes. So our outdoor air, especially when we had like the wildfire season, right, has become, since we've become more aware of health, we've really internalized that, especially in cities, you're going to need mechanical ventilation because it allows you to do filtration, right? So I think that shift from sort of open and porous buildings to buildings that are better sealed and then better controlled is a huge trend. And then once you get into a central system, right, because you're trying to do filtration, then the question becomes, how do you do it right? And there's sort of been unquestioned assumptions about control. You're never going to get people to agree. You can't give people individual control. That certainly were challenging, and I think others are challenging as well. But there's also an aspect of ventilation, right? So when you ventilate and you just shoot air willy-nilly, it's not a very effective way to ventilate. You end up breathing a lot of air from your feet. Like when you're sitting at your desk, this is going to sound gross, but you breathe air that's sort of convected up from your feet and the floor. And it's been stale air, right? Our mission, and others are doing this as well, is improve ventilation effectiveness. So instead of using more outside air, conditioning more air, how do we take the air we already have and use it sort of judiciously by delivering it more immediately to the individual so they're breathing less of that stale air that we talked about and more of the fresh air. So I think there's a trend towards kind of sealing buildings up. If you look at Passive House, which is another interesting, NYU just finished a couple years ago, like one of the biggest Passive House buildings we've seen in New York. Passive House is taking off. And one of the concepts of Passive House is seal the building up really, really well, and then bring in air exactly as you need it and use it judiciously, and then recover any energy or like heat from the air that you're exhausting. And so that is really the shift from super porous to super careful.
But as we try to make these buildings more and more insular, it almost makes them, or it seems as though the human climate is often inhospitable for the biome. Hopefully you can introduce some plants near our feet or noses so that we're not taking that stale air in. But how do these two match up actually?
I mean, that's definitely doable. But I think the bigger question, unfortunately, we don't have these cool geodesic domes because that would be awesome. But we are seeing larger and larger building complexes, right? And the challenge with those is we're centralizing more and more square footage under single buildings, but we're kind of losing the human in that. And so we have to create these regional hubs or comfort areas within spaces to make everyone actually comfortable. And so as you create a bigger building, you're going to have more use cases and more types of people using that space. You need to plan for the various needs of those people. And so I think, to what they're doing with localized, like hyper-local air, we need to think about wellness hyper-locally in those big spaces. And similarly with plants, they need different living conditions, right? Different lighting, different humidity, temperature needs. And if the building or intelligence is not helping the plant get what it needs, it's going to die. And so our devices, we rely on a lot of sensors actually at the plant level to understand what's happening with temperature and humidity and light, and then adjust onboard settings through the firmware so we can keep plants alive no matter where you put them. And so that allows you to put plants in a really dark environment, maybe a pass-through hallway in a basement where you previously couldn't really have comfort or well-being being a priority. And so I think as we get these really big buildings, we need more and more individualized solutions, ironically.
I think that's really interesting. I think you're saying plants make spaces more hospitable for humans, but we need to make spaces more hospitable for the plants.
Precisely, yeah.
And I think that's beautiful. And I think it requires some of the same, sensors and sort of centralized control and digital systems that we use, but for plants.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's this symbiosis, really. Like we help plants, they help us, and we get this great feedback loop going.
Yeah, and programming that into a system like yours, would allow you different controls for different areas. Let's actually go with that for a second, because as we look at the work landscape, I know that we were talking previously about people that have different needs in the workplace, and whether those needs are of a plant or they're of someone who might be neurodivergent and needs to customize their space. Let's just take a moment and talk about what that means for productivity and how that might be rolled out for a company looking at a work landscape, both from a plant standpoint, whether it's in hallways and circulation, or from your desk and large meeting rooms?
As far as the research that I've done over the years, either for NUMA or in previous roles, I think with neurodivergence, you look at control again, right? You look at sort of having agency, and a lot of the work has been done around lighting. We've even looked at expanding into sort of task lighting, but sensitivity to lighting levels and ability to adjust those lighting levels is critical. I think in terms of neurodivergence, a little less research in terms of effective temperature. I'm sure there's something there where, again, if you're trying to make spaces inclusive, right? We always talk about how much thermal range there is in the world, right? There's people who are comfortable at 78 degrees Fahrenheit, and there's people who really need it to be 67. And it seems like, indulgent, but I think it's really not. I think it's about making spaces, again, hospitable for the full range of humans that we have, which includes folks who are neurodivergent.
Mm. And then how does that, if I'm cohabiting in a conference room, who chooses the temperature?
In a conference room, you can also do NUMA, right? Or something like it where you have control per chair. So increasingly, people spend a lot of their days in conference rooms. I mean, depends on the role, right?
We camp out.
We've done mostly workstation work, but conference rooms are also a place where individual control can matter, especially if somebody had the crazy idea of doing a 2-hour meeting.
Right. And I imagine that as we look at certification processes like LEED or WELL, are they pushing these technologies forward? And are these innovation points, or are these just something that we should expect to be the norm in the future? And let's start with bringing green elements into the building. It seems pretty obvious for some of these.
Definitely want to touch on that. I think just one thing on the neurodivergent piece, I think it really comes down to diversity of space, and how do we create, especially in these big buildings, environments where everyone has a place. Because ultimately, places exist for people to use them and to maximize their output, whether it's using the gym or eating at a restaurant or being productive at work. But if there are factors in that environment that trigger people or check them out of their creative streak or just distract them, they're ultimately not allowing those people to perform. And so whether it's using foliage to reduce acoustics, using lighting to increase alertness, there's a lot of ways we can actually have our buildings essentially become medicine, or ways to enhance the well-being of people at a physiological level. And I think that that's one of the really exciting pieces of neurodivergence, is you're allowing everyone to actually show up and be their best person, and leverage the building as part of that.
Well, it's really the symbiosis that I think you were talking about earlier, that as long as that raises our performance within a space, it's not just having a potted plant in a corner.
For sure.
All the sad fiddle figs of the world.
Yeah, it's tough walking around sometimes and seeing all these sad plants in the world. But onto the certifications, I think that the real leaders in the space are the startups that are seeing innovation that needs to be created and creating it, and then the occupiers and tenants that are the beta testers, that are like meeting those new innovative ideas and utilizing them. I think the certifications are a great way to get credibility for the work that you're doing, and they're a really good kind of carrot for the industry. But I think really a lot of the innovation's happening at this kind of grassroots innovation level, but we then have to bridge the gap to, very large entities that have massive portfolios. And how do you cross that bridge? I think that's really where we're at with innovation in the built environment right now.
Yeah. The flip side of that is, local laws and regulations that might also be kind of driving, as we are in New York with Local Law 97, different elements for energy consumption forward. So, thinking about the way that either the plants contribute to less filtration systems and therefore less consumption, or how we're talking about shutting down parts of a building or putting them into sleep mode, as we've talked about with some futurists that are on some of our future episodes. Check out that series that'll be coming up. We talk about hibernation of these mechanical systems, and that leads to less consumption. So what's not that you would necessarily have to, I'm going to make you choose though. Is it that innovation that's pushing people forward towards productivity, or are they really responding, as we've seen in New York, to some of the local laws and the push from the regulatory market?
I think though the local laws have attracted a lot of attention, it's not driven that as much innovation as you'd think. I think the biggest thing that I've seen is how many buildings have explored electrification with heat pumps, right? So taking their heating system that was combustion based and switching it over to a heat pump driven system. That's been the biggest thing, right? And ground up construction, we just see, 270 Park, JP Morgan Chase's new headquarters. That's an all electric building. Disney's headquarters in Hudson Square, that's an all electric building. That's the biggest shift. Although, both of those I think started thinking about electrification even before Local Law 97. By the way, Local Law 97 compliance was May 1st. So look out for the reporting for that and see how bad the fines really are and, who's reporting and who's not. But for us, I think it goes beyond any regulatory. And I go with what Colin said about, again, solving painful problems for people is still the key driver above certifications, above regulatory compliance. There's ways to just maybe eat the fine. There's ways to get to like LEED silver, LEED gold without adopting our technologies. I think it's folks who are really trying to do the best for employees in their offices. I think that those key people in these corporate real estate groups, those are who are driving this. And then it's sort of an added bonus to get the certification and get, reduced fines. Remember, tenants a lot of times don't even feel the fines. So Local Law 97 has really been more of a landlord thing than anything.
Yeah, and we aren't seeing too many people actually impacted in the first couple of years because the regulations are pretty loose.
2030 is probably when you start to see it being a little more painful. 2024 was easier to get to.
It's just having us talk about it almost also helps drive the market forward. So just wondering, how quickly are you seeing these being adopted and in what markets? Is this happening more on the East Coast here in New York, or are we looking across the country and seeing different hotspots? Oh, we're looking at you, Colin.
All right, I can take that, yeah. I think we're seeing innovation happen pretty much everywhere. New projects are happening throughout the country, and it'd be surprising sometimes to see where these facilities are happening. We work with healthcare clients, so that's spread pretty geographically everywhere. I think obviously New York has a huge portfolio here, so there's more potential adoption, which helps a lot. There's just more deal flow essentially to tap into, and in a way more competition between buildings to amenitize and to kind of embrace the next. So I think that's exciting. That kind of increases the flywheel a bit. But in terms of the kind of smart buildings and healthy buildings, I think it's something that intuitively everyone kind of grasps regardless of where they're living.
I think for us, there's geographical patterns around the Middle East. They have a little bit more of an appetite for innovation, and they have a climate where HVAC represents such a huge fraction of the total energy use, and their energy costs are high. So that's a market for sure that we can thrive in. I also think Florida, again, hot weather, large HVAC loads, the savings are greater, the energy savings are greater. That's a market that we've seen activity in. But I really go back to innovative individuals, right? It's really those champions, and that cuts across coasts, countries. Certainly there's a sort of land and expand. I think Colin's felt this too, where once you get credibility with, a big Fortune 500, it's easier to then to jump offices, go from looking at an office in New York to looking at an office in Bangalore, and they're like, it's the same people, right? It's maybe a different local implementation group, but it's the same corporate heads who already feel like, okay, we've vetted this. Let's start rolling it out.
Yeah, and it really becomes a flywheel of adoption as well, because that familiarity drives everything forward. All right. I've been reading a book called What If We Get It Right?
Beautiful.
Yeah, well, we could hope.
Fingers crossed.
We have to hope,
yeah.
right? We have to hope.
Yeah. Well, we also have to make it happen.
Yes.
So what does that look like for you? We'll start with Colin again.
So, all those like AI images of super green, lush cities where like plants are hanging everywhere. We want to make that a reality, right? I think that's the visual that a lot of people create for like what a healthy urban future looks like. That actually takes a lot of technology and resource to build out and make all of that thrive and work and make it embeddable in the built environment. And so really that's kind of a North Star for us, because if you can actually distribute nature ubiquitously, you capture all the ecosystem benefits. You capture the thermal shading on a building to reduce the energy demands. You create pollinator habitat. You store stormwater. You purify outdoor air pollution. You reduce wildfire smoke. So we want to stack up all of these ecosystem benefits in the built environment and use natural technologies to do that. So I just think you're going to see nature everywhere.
So you are AI. You're the DALL-E of green futures.
We're going to make it a reality.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
I think in terms of how we get it right, we have a lot of good products and a lot of good innovation that isn't necessarily being implemented, that has an ROI. And the two things that I think about in my day-to-day, one is resilience, right? Finding out that, there's people in real estate who don't want to change is not news to anybody who's listening to this podcast, and you just have to keep going and going and going. So resilience. But then I also think there's an element of, as folks who are developing products think, oh my God, I've got the best thing since sliced bread. What they really have to look at is, what are the really specific pain points of all the different stakeholders who can create a no, right? So you're almost a politician. You're going around and you're talking to all these different stakeholder groups: operations, design and construction, the sustainability folks, the sustainability consultants, the contractors, right? Everyone needs to be on board and aligned, or at least not say no, for something to get done. And so I think there's as much work developing these types of products as there's probably more work in sort of getting in front of folks, getting them to see what's in it for them, and thinking about what's in it for them personally, right? I think that's where the work is in terms of how do we get it right. It's not just what's the innovation, it's really that rollout and implementation. And I think the same applies to, we look at the utility side and all the clean tech. They figured out, where to put solar, how to put solar, and all this stuff. It's the same ideas where it's not just the product, it's really the process of rolling out.
Yeah, and that's our biggest step, which is next to make it actually happen.
And I'd add one thing quick.
Oh, no, please.
I think getting the built environment to be on the technology curve that we've seen for mobile devices and laptops, right, where they can improve at an exponential rate. And I think what we're starting to see with technologies like NUMA and what we're doing at BIOME is we're starting to create technologies that can actually get to low enough cost to go to scale and to make the built environment part of this rapidly innovating technology ecosystem. And I think that's what the future looks like. Our buildings really becoming rapidly smarter, healthier, and just more fulfilling places to be.
Fantastic. To get more about these innovations and to follow and connect with you guys, where should we be looking, Colin?
If you want to check out BIOME, you can find us at biome.us. We're on Instagram. Our website, of course, biome.us. And then if you want to shoot me an email, Collin, COLLIN, at biome.us.
Go to numaproducts.com. You can reach me at Gab, at numaproducts.com.
Awesome. And of course, to hear all about Colin and Gab's winning product pitches, among others, you need to join us at some of our in-person events. Green Sparks is just one of many here at CoreNet New York. And be sure to check out our full calendar of events, including the upcoming East Regional Conference at CoreNet.org. To catch more episodes of the Big Apple's Core podcast, please follow us on Apple Podcasts or like and subscribe on YouTube. I'm Nathan Streeter, and we'll see you again next month.